Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Have a Chat. My name is Judy Loge, your host for today's show, and I'm joined by my beautiful, always on the ball, and joy to be with co-host Veronique Garcino. Welcome, Veronique.
I don't know about on the ball, Judy. Especially, I'm not getting enough sleep these days. You and I talk about it all the time. About
No,
we both have
no.
some terrible insomnia, but it's just really not
Mm.
not happening for me lately.
No, I'm not sleeping, but you are on the ball, and I value your being a co-host. Or when I'm hosting with you, I think that we are a good little combination, and we're going to get Audrey back someday when we get back out of the COVID situation. She's going to join us again once we're live, but again, her work commitment doesn't allow for that right now. And we are joined by a lovely gentleman that some of you may have met or seen in person or met on our show before, and that would be Sean Smith. He's living in Fredericton. He is a consultant, owner, advocate, and a really good guy. And he is with Don't Diss My Ability. Welcome, Sean.
Thanks for having me.
You're always a pleasure to have on the show. Veronique and I enjoy when you're on. So just in a nutshell, tell us again who you are and a little bit about your life.
Sure. I am a counselor and psychotherapist by trade, and I specialize in the emerging field of neurodiversity, which is a relatively new word in the world of psychology that represents a group of individuals with a disability label, but for whom the term disabled doesn't quite fit because our assets exceed any deficits we experience. And so I'm unique in the way that I self-identify as being neurodiverse. I was diagnosed with ADHD and attentive type at the age of 30. Managed to get through college and university undiagnosed, and then was prescribed medication when I was 30, which basically took my thought process from dial-up to fiber op. Went back to upgrade as a mature student. Took five courses, new GPA of 3.7, and then in 2010, I was accepted to the Master of Education in Counseling Psychology program at the University of New Brunswick on academic probation, and graduated a year later at the top of my class.
So you're not real bright or anything, but we'll just, yeah. Incredible. I can't believe
it's funny you say that because I kind of refer to the period before I was diagnosed as the Neanderthal era. I was a slightly less evolved version of myself.
But
no,
Sean,
not at all. It's
so
incredible.
before you were diagnosed, though, did you feel like you weren't that bright? Like, did you? No, and I know that sounds like a terrible question, but I love your analogy when you said you went from dial-up to fiber op, like, because everything made sense then, right? And it connected. But did you think, and I hate to use this word, but did you think you were stupid before you were diagnosed?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I was convinced that I was dumb, that I was stupid. I mean, I submitted an article that'll be published in the Maritime Edit. This kind of my life story, and I talk about how my parents tried everything that parents tried at that time, right? I mean, it was the 80s, so being in special education at that time was almost like a life sentence, right? It was like Hotel California. You could check in anytime you like, but you could never leave, and that affected your life.
Absolutely,
really.
Yeah.
I don't mean to laugh, but it's funny how you.
Oh, I laugh at it now, but it's so, I have been doing a lot of reflecting on what life was like before. And I describe it as hell. Like I felt like I was wrongfully imprisoned in my own mind. And so, with the ADHD comes the unknowing, right? So the anxiety and the depression of wondering what's wrong with you. But in my case, it was, for 30 years of my life, wondering what was wrong with me, only to stumble into what was right about me.
Right. That's wonderful that's how you brought it all together, and you've done incredibly well in life. And to have this going on, maybe Veronique, you have another question about his actual business and anything else that you want to entertain him on?
Absolutely. So, talk to us a little bit about "Don't Diss My Ability" and how that all came to be, and what's happened over. I mean, it's been a few years since you've been on the show with us, so kind of catch us up on how you started and where you are now.
Well, interestingly enough, how I started, I was actually helping people with the disability tax credit certificate, which is a hidden tax credit for people with disabilities. And Canada Revenue kind of changed the rules of the game and made it harder to access. And I only charged the fee if the person got a return. And so they kept denying more and more of these requests. So I had to actually pivot and switch gears, and haphazardly found my groove in counseling.
Yeah.
and just, recognizing my own unique gifts that I have by way of having ADHD and attentive type, and then being
Mhm.
able to kind of help other uniquely gifted individuals who are often misunderstood, to help them understand their thought process, but also explore their passions and to figure out how do we take this further. The A lot of times the people who are closest to us provide the least amount of encouragement, and
Yeah.
so you kind of build this narrative of, the similar to my story, right, of,
Hmm.
not really living up to my potential. And to go back to the point of it being hell and all those things, I can remember, Benedict and Judy, I can remember my midterm report card where I got 6% in typing, and I left it at the back door on my mom's way out of the house on her way to work to sign, and I can still remember
Oh.
the shrill of her voice. So it's
Oh.
those types of things that, I'm able to now help people with, not only, individuals who might have a certain diagnosis, but also working with the families and the parents to get them to understand their child's thought process, not to excuse behavior, but to help them understand where it comes from.
Hmm.
Well, and
So just give
I'm
us
sure.
oh, sorry.
Well, I'm sure that your parents and your mom probably thought you were very bright, right? Speaking to you, and they probably just thought, not knowing any better, that you weren't applying yourself and you weren't,
Mm.
all of those things that we label kids who are struggling. They probably thought that's what was going on with you, and so you kind of, I'm putting words in your mouth, but maybe that built your narrative around that.
My parents, no, not really. I mean, not that I didn't build my narrative around it. My parents actually, like, they own a. My mom passed away quite a few years ago, but my family's always owned businesses, and my parents actually built a branch of their business, thinking like, what the heck are we going to do with Sean? Like, they
Oh.
really. If you'd ask my parents which one of us, me or my two siblings, which one of us would have been successful or gone on to post secondary, it would have been my brother, my sister, the cat, the dog, and then me. Like, it was bad, right? Like, it took
Yeah.
me 4 years to finish 3 years of high school.
Right.
32 attempts to earn the 18
Real,
credits required to graduate. I failed grade 10 math 4 times. So I didn't give
real
my parents a whole
struggle.
lot to work with. And oh yeah, and at that time, my parents didn't have me assessed, not for the reasons that I'd like to think, that I literally would have been on the short bus that goes nowhere in life,
Mm.
but because at that time it was perceived as a reflection of poor parenting. If you had a child
Mm.
with a disability, people would judge you. What did you do to,
Right.
to deserve such a child like that?
Hmm.
Hmm. Okay. So let's get right into some successful, maybe without naming a person, someone that you've worked with that you see such
Sure.
reward in with your counseling and consulting and working like closely to make that person the best they can be.
Yeah, a lot of the kids that I work with, typically they're not in school for one reason or another. So I always try to think of different ways to help them. And so one of the questions that I have incorporated into my intake forms is, do you have an identified gift? Because I know that I have specific gifts because of my disability. So I make a point of asking that, because everyone else is trying to fixate and focus on what they think is wrong with the person, where I
Mhm.
start with what's right about them. So one success story that I'm really happy to share is a young man who's autistic, who, in and out of school. And when I was working with mom and I asked the question of, what is your son's gift? She said that he liked to draw. And so I thought, okay, this is great. And so I asked her to bring in the pictures, and they're elementary level, but they're unique enough that they just kind of caught my eye. So I thought, how
Mm.
how can we take this further? So I got in touch with a friend of mine who owns a publishing company, and said, this could be something or it could be nothing, but would you mind having a look at this? And so we're working on the company publishing this young man's book. So here's a young guy who's, in and out of school, but he's going to be a published author, right? So
Wow.
it's
Mm.
those types of things. Another success story. Another young man I was working with, who's also autistic, had a gap in his school for about 2 years in high school, and during that time, he taught himself how to use cybersecurity. And so when I
Oh
Wow.
started
my
working
gosh.
with him, I
Right.
helped him get through high school. And whenever I can assess somebody's unique gift, I try to tap into someone in my network who can assess their competency level. And so I have
Hmm.
a friend, Dr. James Stewart, who met with this young man, and after an hour-long conversation, James said, by the time this young man is 20, he's 18 now, he's going to be making $250,000 a year in this industry.
Oh my
So
gosh, that's exciting.
really kind
Rewarding.
of, I get high from my work every day. Like these are the types of
Yeah,
things that I get to do in my work, right? So it's very
I
exciting. It's
love
very
it.
rewarding.
Love it, love it, love it. Yes, for sure. Pharaoh?
Yeah, and I do follow you on social media, so I know that prior to COVID, you were traveling around quite a bit, and I know that you do a lot of public speaking, a lot of guest lecturing. Talk to us a little bit about some of your partnerships around North America.
Sure. Well, the most exciting one I have right now is definitely with the University of Connecticut. They put together a proposal for what is called the Include program, where they look to retain and recruit neurodiverse students for their civil and environmental engineering programs. And so it's the first type of project of its kind. So it's extremely innovative. And I'm really, really happy to be part of that project. So it was really neat to get connected to them and have them see the value in what I'm doing right here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and how it can benefit their university. So it's pretty neat. So
Hmm.
I'm there. I'm a guest lecturer, which we do virtually, but I'm also a consultant and I'm on the advisory board for the program.
My
That's
gosh, you're
amazing.
busy, Sean. You're so busy, but you have your own, this is your own private work that you do. So is there anyone else that does that type of thing in Fredericton or anywhere else in the province or out of province exactly as to what you do?
No, uh,
No, you're
no,
unique.
not really. It's I guess what I bring to the table is that I was that kid, right? That
Mhm,
struggled, and so part of it is me being an empath and being able to connect with people, but also having those shared experiences allow me to connect with
mhm,
them in a way that maybe other people haven't been able to.
mhm. Growing and growing. You're just going ahead full speed. Incredible individual. Very unique.
Sean, tell us what's next for you. Like this. You said it's an emerging field. There's obviously not very many people that are doing this. You've got that project with the university in the States, but what's on the horizon? Or I guess what is that thing that you really want to do that you haven't done yet?
Mm.
Oh, I don't know if we have enough time. I have a long list of
Yeah,
things,
we
but
do
right now
actually. Well, we do. We do. We're okay. We
We're
do have
good.
lots of
we're,
time actually. Hmm. Yeah.
right now I'm focused on growing my business. So one very exciting thing that's happened for me is that I was part of a national organization, the Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapy Association, of which I'm also the provincial ambassador. And then this past
Mm.
summer, I joined the College of Counseling Therapists of New Brunswick. And so now my services are covered by most insurance companies. So what was
Oh,
challenging before is that people who needed my services were likely the people who couldn't afford it the most. So a lot of my referrals come from social development, but now my services are covered by Blue Cross and Sun Life. So more and more people are able to access my services, which is great.
That is
that's
so
awesome.
excellent. So again, give people some information about how they can reach you and what they can expect. Let's just give an idea of a person that might be struggling with a certain area and what you can, how it works basically. You get referrals, but if I had a kid that was, with a disability, ADHD or whatever, and wanted to be kind of going full speed ahead and making something valuable happen in their lives, what's the connection? How does that work? If I was a
Well, the
mother,
only
if I
way,
was a mother, yeah.
sure. And you know what? It's Judy, it's mostly the mama bears who reach out to me. So
Mhm.
it really is. Um, you can do a Google search for "Don't Diss My Ability." I mean, I tell people the only way you can't find me is if you're living under a rock. I mean, I'm on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook,
Okay. All right.
LinkedIn. It's pretty hard not to find me if you're looking.
Good.
And really, what typically happens is I try to work with the parents first, because if I don't work with the parents and I work with the child and I send them back to the same ignorant home, I'm actually doing a disservice to the child. So I really
Yeah.
try to work with the parents, and a lot of it is around the language. So if someone comes into my office and they say, can you fix my kid? If they keep using that language, I politely show them the door. A diagnosis is now
Oh,
perceived as a
yeah.
broken part of a machine that once identified can be fixed, but we're not machines or people. We don't need fixing, we need
No.
nurturing. And so where,
Right.
typical counseling looks at what is perceived to be the problem and then try to fix it. I kind of relate more towards psychotherapy than counseling. And I guess
Hmm.
the big difference or distinction between the two is that, I use the analogy of riding a bike. So if you ride a bike and you fall off, a counselor is going to help get you bandaged up, help get you cleaned up, and make sure that you have the tools to fix yourself or patch yourself up if
Yeah.
you should fall off again. whereas a psychotherapist
Mhm.
will explore why they fell off the bike in the first place. So really, for me,
Okay.
it's more about the psychotherapy of understanding people's thought process and patterns,
Mm.
and being able to kind of look at different spots where we might be able to fine tune or change things. But again, using an asset based of, using their passion kind of as the context for communication and learning, because we spend so much of our time trying to get people to fit into our world that we rarely explore how we can fit into theirs. And that's been kind of my secret recipe, really, is connecting with people, finding out what
Yeah.
their passions are, and then tapping into my network to find someone who can, really figure out where this person is. I mean, I've been very fortunate to work with, there was one individual I was working with who was uh, was really into freestyle rap, and I was able to hook him up with a local rapper, and we had,
Oh.
narrative therapy through rap. I had another client who could make clay figurines, and I had him working with a local artist. And after our very first session, the artist said, "Sean, I've never had anybody pick it up as quickly as this kid has."
Oh my
So
gosh.
really, it's incredible.
Yeah.
But again, the focus has been on what maybe, some of the negative behaviors, or what they're not going to school, they're not attending regularly, or they're not doing the work. And so the focus tends to go there. I'll get there, but we're gonna focus on something that they're actually interested in first. And the other stuff will just
Mhm.
be kind of an organic process that comes up, instead of diving right in and trying to, again, fix what is perceived to be the problem.
That is
Do
so
you find
interesting.
do you find language too tends to be a challenge in and what I mean by that is, you know, creating or perpetuating more of that stigma around diagnoses and that behavior and all it you know it, just even in the title of your company, don't diss my ability as opposed to
Mhm.
disability. Do you find changing
Yeah.
that language is a tough part that you have to kind of navigate through?
Uh, Not anymore, really. But and I think a big reason for that, but Nick, is that I used to think locally, and when I was fixated on thinking locally, nothing happened. And when I kind of changed my way of thinking to, my business may be local, but my market is global, that's when there was
Mhm.
really kind of a shift, and I started to get picked up more in the States than I do here. So like my market for speaking consulting is in the States. Like I was a guest lecturer at the University of Miami a couple of years ago. I got to present alongside of Temple Grandin.
Mm.
But I'm not recognized as much here as an expert as I am in the States. So it's kind of an odd thing.
No,
It's
I think
amazing.
it's fabulous. I can't get over what you're offering out there. And just to think of what you were a boy in school and, going through what you went through and then to just rise to the top as you have, you're just going to keep going, right, Sean? Like you're powered up now for the future.
Oh,
You're never going to
there's
sit
no
back.
other option. Giving
No,
up was
there's
never
no
an
limit.
option, right? So
No, but you're limitless when it comes to ideas and expansion and actually, bringing out the best of all these people that you come in contact with as referrals. And I feel so sorry for your kids. They must be psychotherapied out, are they?
well, what, between my wife and I, my wife's a social worker, so
Oh, God.
there's it makes for
Good
an
kids?
interesting childhood, I'm sure.
Yeah.
um
Or
Sean, when you think about it, we've asked a lot of our guests this, since we've been shooting from home, but, how have you been doing through the pandemic? Like, with your own health and your, just coping in general, how have you been doing?
I'm doing better now. It was tough for a while. I mean, I think part of it is the mental health aspect of being an entrepreneur. And I like to say that no one ever said being awesome would be easy. There's a mental toll for operating at the level that we do.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to kind of recognize our own limits. And I think for me, it was I got burnt out from doing so much all the time, that I had to kind of take a step back from doing things like promoting myself on social media as much as I was, and just kind of
Mhm.
reevaluating, the type of person, the type of husband, the type of parent that I want to be, and kind of taking a step back from putting everything into my business, which wasn't a healthy balance, and really spending more time on myself. I started biking last summer. I know it's hard to tell now, but I've lost 35 pounds in 5 months.
Good.
Just
That's
just
Awesome.
from
awesome.
eating a little bit cleaner.
Yeah.
And it, little things like that. I think a lot of people think that there's one thing that will help you, but it's really trying to figure out what the recipe of things is. And the
Mhm.
goal really is not to settle or become complacent, but to keep trying and keep moving forward to find what that recipe is going to be for you.
Yeah,
Mhm. Do your
absolutely.
children ask you a lot of questions? They know how well informed you are and how well you're trained in working with other people and enhancing their skills and all of that. Do they come to you for advice, Sean, or do you kind of just lend it to them as needed?
It's kind of it's interesting. I mean, I see parts of my son and my brother-in-law, and I see parts of my daughter and me. And so,
Yeah.
both have a lot of kids do, and a lot of people have characteristics consistent with ADHD. And I like to tell
Mhm.
people, like, there aren't going to be less of us. There's only going to be more. We are modern day X-Men. This is part of evolution.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's really interesting. But I mean, my wife and I are both very community minded. My wife is one of the directors for Sexual Violence New Brunswick. So my kids
Oh,
are, we go back to Take Back the Night. My kids would
mm,
randomly chant, "Hey hey ho ho, the patriarchy's got to go" in our house.
good.
So it's
Good.
it's they're
Yeah.
very socially conscious.
That's
You're
awesome.
leading by example, basically leading by example and a wonderful role model. And so I'm sure they have a bright and beautiful future ahead of them. So, any last words before we go to our break? Because we have to say goodbye to you and welcome another guest.
Thanks for having me on. I always appreciate talking to you folks that have a chat. It's always a blast. Miramichi is kind of my home away from home. Oddly enough, I feel like I'm more recognized there than I am in my own home city.
As connected as you are across the province and across the country, that you use those connections and network for your work and for the people that you work with, and I love all of that. So thanks, Sean, for what you do. It's I've been fascinated by your work since I met you many years ago.
So, don't go away, folks. We're going to be shortly with you again. Thank you. Welcome back. We have a chat. If you're just joining us, thank you for tuning in. Once again, I'm your host for this week's show, Judy Loge, joined by my beautiful co-host, Veronique Arsenault. And thanks for returning, because we have with us a very interesting, lovely lady, happens to be a friend of mine and a friend to many people in Miramichi. And if you don't know her, her name is Dawn Lynch. So, Dawn, for anyone who does not know you as an active member of Miramichi, tell the viewers a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks, first of all, Judy, for inviting me. I am a lifelong resident of Miramichi, born and raised in Nelson. My mom and dad are still there. I have two brothers and one sister, and we all live in Miramichi. I have 8 nieces and nephews. Graduated from James M. Hill in 1990. Graduated from NBCC in 1995. Wow, that's a long time ago. I took the youth care worker course. I was a correctional officer for 15 years at the youth center. And in between that and now, I've had many hats. Currently, I'm an education assistant at King Street Elementary School. And I'd have to say that it is easily one of my most favorite jobs I've ever held, for sure.
I can attest to that, because you're a people person and people kind of gravitate towards you, Dawn. You have that type of personality and warmth about you. And like, we're so honored to have you come on our show, because it's not everybody that can come on and talk about a very sensitive subject, something that we all at some point deal with in our lives, and that's mental health. And we are certainly keen to talk to you and have the discussion about it. Last week, as we know, we celebrated Mental Health Week. It should be not just during the week, but every day that we talk about good mental health. But there are people, 1 in 5, basically in Canada, that suffer from poor mental health. And you were good enough to come on and share your story. So let's just start right at the beginning as to when you were first presenting with things that you knew were in just the right way to feel.
I guess for me, it was an accumulative thing, Judy. And it all started for me in 2013. That year, I left my 15-year career as a correctional officer and took a job that was better on paper and ended up with no job because the job that I took, I was not suited for, and it was not suited for me. And like you said, I am a people person, and I dealt with people and behavior and interactions and using interpersonal skills on a daily basis, and left that and went to sitting in front of 3 computer screens, and that was not for me. And so I left a job I loved, ended up with a job I really, really did not like, and then ended up with no job. In 2014, I ended up with a severe back injury that required surgery. So I was laid up for about 8 months, start to finish. And in that time, I dealt with chronic pain while I was waiting for my surgery. I lost the quality of life that I had always enjoyed and known for many years. I love to exercise. I love being outside. I love playing with my kids. Love the gym, and all of that came to a screeching halt. So to me, that was a huge loss, and I had to gradually accept that I couldn't do any of those things anymore, with the fear that I may never be able to do them anymore. So finally, I had surgery in July of that year, and it was a huge success. And I'm not one to take medication, and I couldn't wait to get off of the medication that I had to be on because of how it made me feel. So unknowingly and unwisely, I stopped all of my medication cold turkey, and then went through severe withdrawals. And my central nervous system was affected because I stopped it so suddenly, and that caused depression and severe mood swings and irritability and insomnia. I had a headache for 7 weeks. It was not a good time. I felt extreme guilt for not being able to do the things that I wanted to do with my kids. I felt guilt of when my kids would see me behave in ways that scared me, let alone them. And it was because of the severe mood swings that I was experiencing. So that took about almost 2 months. And then so that was July, August, September. I started feeling better at the end of September. In October, my marriage ended. That was I processed all of these things up till that point as losses. And that one was huge, because then you're having to accept and try to move forward without the dream that you always had in your mind of what your married life would look like with your husband and your children. And I had to let that go. And then in 2015, early in 2015, I moved into my own place. And while that was the right thing to do, with that came financial stress, having absolutely no idea how to be a single parent. It came with all kinds of worry about everything at that time, worry how I would pay my bills, worry how I would get my kids in 2 different places at the same time. Trying to get used to a new home and all of what that meant, and providing different, and then not to mention being here by myself. I've always been able to be by myself. I am a natural loner as far as that goes, and an introvert, but that became heightened as well. So that was 2015. In 2016 was when I really started to notice that I wasn't feeling great. I barely slept. I had a hard time staying still in my house. I never sat down on a couch or chair or anything in this house in the evenings by myself for 6 months. If I could be outside and walking and moving, that's what I did. I could not be alone with my thoughts. I had to be doing something all the time. And all the while telling myself, it's normal. A lot has gone on, it's all new. It'll get better. It'll get easier. It won't always feel like this. It'll get easier. A lot of things, and all of them, again, I processed as losses. In my mind, they were all losses. Jobs, I had to leave the job that I had been in, took another job, ended up working 2 jobs, and then finally settled into one with the hope and the expectation that it was going to be a really good place for me. And turned out it wasn't. I ended up having to deal with workplace harassment and being, I don't even know it was a poison work environment. A lot of emotional abuse of power and authority. That took its toll. By the fall, I knew I wasn't okay, and I knew that I needed some help, and I sought out some counseling. And when I started seeing the counselor, and she started telling me, and after telling her what I'd been experiencing, and she gave me a sheet of paper, and she asked me to read it. And at the top of it was signs and symptoms of PTSD. And when I looked at that list and read it and realized that I'd had almost every single one on there out of 20 or more, it helped. But at the same time, it scared me as well, because I finally knew, what was wrong with me. I knew why I was feeling the way I felt, but now I'm dealing with this diagnosis of PTSD, and what do I do about this? So as the counseling wore on, I learned more about brain chemistry. I learned about why my brain was affected the way it was, why I thought the way I thought, why I felt the way I felt. And she explained it to me in a way that I could really, really understand. And she drew pictures, and I'm a very visual learner. So when I could see that the floodgates in my brain, when we're stressed, when we're in fight or flight, when we're afraid, and those floodgates open and release adrenaline and cortisol, that's a good thing, because it keeps us safe, and we our bodies go into action, to protect ourselves and to keep ourselves safe. But mine never closed. I was in fight or flight all the time, from the so many changes happening so quickly. And again, everything that had happened, I processed as a loss. Not knowing at the time, looking back now, I certainly don't see all of them as losses. They were stepping stones, some of them. But once your brain starts to become unhealthy, it only gets worse. For me anyway, it did. Everything that happened then after was tinted with negative thoughts and fear. There was so much fear, fear of everything in the future. I like I said, I don't do well with change, and so much in my life had changed in such a short amount of time. And that was a real struggle for me, and trying to control the things that I could in my life. I probably went above and beyond trying to compensate for the things that I couldn't control. That December of 2016 was when I started taking medication for the way I was feeling, for the anxiety, for the depression. And I also suffered from seasonal affective disorder. Hadn't suffered from that for a very long time, but it was very possible. When my doctor asked me, what do you think is going on? I told her that it was very, very real possibility that all 3 were present at the time, because of how I was feeling. So I started the medication, and I was very lucky because I did not have any side effects, and I started to feel better. Right after starting that medication, another what I processed as another huge loss hit me, and I had to come to terms with losing a long-term friendship, um, not knowing at the time that there was such a thing as betrayal trauma. That is a very real thing. There's trauma brain is also a very real thing. These were all things that I learned about after. I had no idea that that's what was going on at the time. At that point, when that happened, that was my tipping point. That was me reaching my limit as far as how much my brain could handle. And I went into what was later told to me and explained to me as a schism. And I started to catastrophize, and which is our brain's way of trying to protect us. So because so many big changes and losses happened in my life in such a short amount of time, my poor, ill, and imbalanced brain went to a place where I was 100% convinced that everything that I had experienced up until that time was merely preparing me for the ultimate loss. And I walked around for days and days and days, truly believing that I was going to lose one of my children. That's where I went. And you can, anybody who has children you can imagine what that's like. It was the worst anxiety I'd ever experienced in my life. Every time the phone rang, anytime somebody said my name, I was fearing the worst all the time. It felt like there was a gray cloud over my head. I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was always asking, what's next? What's next? What's next? What more could I possibly lose, or what more could possibly be taken from me? And when catastrophizing starts, it is our brain's way of trying to protect us from more shock and more surprises, so that we convince ourselves that something is going to happen. And if it does, and when it does, we can't be surprised by it. We can't go into, I can't believe this is happening to me. And we get to be right. And we get to say, I told you, I knew that was going to happen. I knew this is what was next. It's a very normal reaction to an abnormal situation, because my brain was so ill at the time. I couldn't process one more thing rationally. It wasn't possible for me to look at the end of that friendship in a way that I could see it as a good thing, as healthy, as needed. Nothing. It was the tipping point for me. And I walked around every day thinking, then the only thing left for me to lose is one of my children. And I had a panic attack at work one day, and I had to go back and see my doctor. And she prescribed another medication for me to get me through that. It was, I can still remember it. I was given 8 pills, I think is all, and that's all I needed. And I knew that I would be able to get through it, the worst of it, and the panic attacks, because my own medication was beginning to work as well.
So we don't want you to go too far, folks, because we have more from Dawn Lynch coming right up with us on Have a Chat after the break. Grab a coffee, and we will see you right back on set. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to Have a Chat. I'm Judy Loge, joined by my wonderful co-host, Veronique Arsenault. And if you're just tuning in, we are back with Dawn Lynch. who is a very vibrant member of Miramichi community. She's an educational assistant, and she's been talking very passionately about her journey with mental health and all that she has undergone with the battle with different issues, including anxiety, depression, and PTSD. So, Veronique, you probably have a question there for Dawn. She's given us a great lead up to all of this, and we're so thankful to have her.
Absolutely, Dawn, and thanks so much for being willing to come on and talk to us today. How did you get to that point from, when we left off in the last segment where, you were changing your medications and really there had been so much that had happened to you in a very short period of time. How did you get to the point where you started to feel, like yourself again, or that you're even able to come on and talk about this so openly with us?
I think for me, medication was the piece that was missing. I always took good care of myself. I had a support system, and all of the pieces that they recommend that you have to be well mentally, physically, spiritually. And when I started the medication, naturally I could cope better with any of the stressors that life threw at me, simply because I could think. And I wasn't constantly having knee-jerk reactions that were emotion driven. So when I could sit down and intellectualize what was happening and look at it from a perspective of, okay, this is what's going on. What can I do? What can I not control? And how do I move forward with taking care of the here and now? Because anxiety, I believe, I read something one time that said anxiety is living in the future, and depression is about living in the past, and peace of mind is when we're right here in the present. And when I could be present, and in the moment with my children, when I was by myself, when I was with my family, I knew then that things were getting better for me, because my mind wasn't wandering in other places, either forward or backward. I love to be outside. Nature has been nothing but a balm for me. Being in the woods and surrounded by trees and water feels like home for me. That was a huge piece for me. Journaling. I love to write. I write probably almost every day. I keep gratitude journals. There's nothing that will ground you more than writing down what you're grateful for in a given day, because you have to be aware of it. You have to be able to know you're in a moment, because you're seeing something, feeling something, hearing something that makes you grateful to be right there in that moment at that time. So that was another big thing for me. And then as I was able to move into that, then I could start talking about it and telling my friends and family what I had gone through. And for a long time, I didn't say anything about it because I had great guilt and shame over it, because I always had been a strong person. I always was able to handle anything. And there I was, some days not being able to get out of bed. And so with that came guilt. And how would I ever tell my mother that, my kids were gone for 4 days and I haven't left my house? Because they were with their dad. I literally have not spoken to anybody, and I haven't left my house for 4 days. So when I could move past all of those things and know, and because I learned so much about what had happened to my brain, that stigma fell away as well. I wasn't ashamed of it anymore. I could look at it and go, no wonder I felt the way I felt. No wonder I couldn't get out of bed. No wonder I was tired all the time. I ran on fumes. I was exhausted mentally, emotionally, physically. So at some point, when you get to all of that, something has to give. And I reached a point where I just couldn't function anymore without help. And I was not one bit afraid to take the medication. I went to my doctor practically begging for help, because I knew I needed it. And I'm a huge advocate for it. If anybody out there even closely resembles what I was going through and knows there's just something not right, I'm doing all of this and I still don't feel well, try medication. Because I tried everything else before that, and it was what I needed. So to be able to talk about it, and I think another thing that I believe is, we don't suffer for anything, for nothing. We go through what we go through, and to be able to use it in a positive way, and maybe help somebody else because we've already been through it, that's important. That's a reason
That's really,
enough to share it.
yeah.
That's what I believe.
That's
Yes.
Well, you're amazing, and the story is just reaching at my heart, and I'm sure everybody else's, because you can bet on it that there are people watching this show that are going exactly through what you're going through and can so benefit from your advice and your journey, and really relate to you, Dawn. I
Yeah.
just want to address. We have so much time to talk about it, but not a lot. The issue of the stigma. We have to
Hmm.
end the stigma. It's not going to be done or eradicated overnight. We know that, but we've made strides, but there's still a long, long way to go. What would you like to say about ending the stigma and your viewpoint as to how we can take bigger steps?
I think I think the more people who share their stories and
Mm.
the more we can educate people on the fact that it's not just a certain demographic of people who suffer with anxiety and depression, that it can strike
Mm.
anywhere at any time. Um, I think for the most part, when I first told my story and it was on Bell Let's Talk Day about 3 years ago, I think a lot of people who then reached out to me, they were absolutely shocked and had no idea
Yeah.
that I had,
Mhm.
suffered the way that I did. But life is hard sometimes. It really, really
Yeah.
is, and it doesn't discriminate. You can be a victim of it depending on what's happening around you,
Mhm.
and brains can only handle so much. And that
Mhm.
doesn't have to happen to just a certain type of person or somebody who only works here or does that. Um, it can happen, and it does happen to everybody. And I'm hoping that the more Bell Let's Talk days we have, the more people will know and not be afraid to come forward and say, yes, it was me too, and it is me too.
And
Um,
to recognize that the organ's a brain. It's like any other organ that doesn't
that's
function
right.
properly, right?
That's
That's the
right.
big thing.
That's right. We see
Very.
somebody with a cast on their arm or on their leg, and we know that something's broken. But
Mhm.
you never know what someone's dealing with. You can't look at someone and know exactly what they're dealing with, or that they just had one of the worst days of their life. You just don't know.
Right.
So the only way
No, you.
to get it out there is to talk about it.
And you're doing an amazing job. Veronique, before
Thank
we
you,
go,
Jody.
Dawn's got so much information. Anything else you'd like to ask her before we do go to end the show today?
Yeah, absolutely. In the last couple of minutes that we have, just what is the thing that you want people to know, whether it be about you or whether it be about mental health or whatever it may be? What is that last thing that you want everyone to know?
I did a talk one time at the college. Would have been almost 2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago. And I'm also a victims' right advocate. And I was
Mhm.
asked the question, if you could talk to so and so, what would you say? And
Mhm.
my answer, I think, can be used for so many different situations. And for me, it applies to this because oftentimes when we do, we see people who are surprising us in whatever way they might be behaving, and we think, what is wrong with that person? We see that all the
Yeah.
time on the news. We don't understand
Mhm.
completely mental health. What's wrong with them? What's wrong with them? What's wrong with them?
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
my answer to that was, we're taught to ask often, what's the matter with you? I think we should be saying, what happened to you?
Oh, good. Yeah,
What
that's
happened to
really
you?
that's a really good
Because
point.
something happened. Guaranteed something happened.
Hmm.
That's what I think.
Love that.
You must really feel good, Don, about the present moment, because I know you, and I've always known you, and you said that. You said not many people really realize what you were going through, and me being one of them who knew you most of my life. When I saw you,
Mhm.
you were a bubbly, on the go, arm swinging, kind of smiling girl, and underneath that, who would ever know that the pain that you were going through mentally, right? And
Absolutely.
we
Yes.
know how many are walking that walk with you. And that's why it is so important that we have people like yourself voicing it and coming on and saying to others, you are not alone. I mean, I could sit here
Definitely
myself
not.
and Veronique. you and I and Veronique alone could sit and name hundreds of people that we know are affected. And so
Yep.
it has to get better. And you are, and I want you to know, an amazing support system today. So are you feeling pretty good about getting it out more publicly on a television show, it being your first, like your debut?
I'm not sure that I ever thought that that would happen, but when you asked me, I never second guessed it. I didn't have to think about it. Because it's just so important. And one of the things that I had also convinced myself of is that I was suffering by myself, and it's so not true.
Right.
It's not true at
Right.
all. There's so many people that are around you that you may not think they would understand, that you may not think that they would want to sit and listen to you, but I think
Surprising.
when we realize that we're more alike than we are different, it gets a real a whole lot easier to talk about things, because I think the common experience that runs through all of us is feelings, and what we do with those feelings based on what happened to us.
Mm-hmm. And I really think, Don, before we part and say goodbye, that I think people that are watching the show should tape this if they're not watching it live. It's on many different evenings. The Rogers schedule, have a chat. You just have to Google and share it with other people. And we have to get your messages and other people like that are walking through this on the big screen, not just once a month, once a week. We have to get it out there every single day and pass on messages. So I'm just going to give the viewers advice before we say goodbye and thank you to take Dawn's message. It's a powerful learning experience listening to her, and you can go with it. We all know someone affected with anxiety, depression, any form of mental illness. We all do. And so I'd say record it, share it, put it in the schools, put it anywhere that you think you're going to reach people, and so that they know exactly what they're feeling is okay and that they are not alone. Dawn, it's been a pleasure having you on our show, and you're strong and brave. Not everyone can do that.
Thank you, Judy.
They have too much. They're not, I guess, you've come a long way, because just think about how far back you were when you were going through this, and now that you're able to come on TV and talk about it. So I just want to say, keep on keeping on. You're a beautiful mother to your children who are learning so much from you about being strong and resilient, and that's okay to talk about it. And that's the best thing in the world, to talk about exactly how you're feeling. So we hope to see you around the corner, and maybe on a big screen someday, advocating just as you've done today. Yes.
Thank you, Judy.
So Veronique and I,
thank you so much.
We wish you all the best, and to all the viewers that have any experiences for mental health, stay well, stay safe, and know that it can get better.